How's that? Am I amplified? Okay. Well, thank you for coming to this session today, Product Innovation, a current snapshot and predictions for the future of plant-based foods. My name is Jenna Blumenfeld. I'm the Senior Food Editor here at New Hope Network, and I'm so thrilled to introduce to you our wonderful panel of just total plant-based experts. They know everything about it, and they're complete mavens. So to my left, we have Michele Simon. She's the Executive Director of the Plant-Based Foods Association. And we also have Barbara Bruckner-Spisner. Am I saying that correct? Okay. And she's been with Matson and Company for over 20 years, right? And then at the end, we have Min Tsai. He's the founder of Hodo Soy. Probably many of you have heard of that, a delicious tofu company based in California. And so I'm just going to kind of start it off and hand this over to Michele. And we'll have a Q&A at the end. I'll leave a couple of minutes for that, for your questions. Okay?
All right, thank you. Well, thanks, Jenna, and to New Hope for hosting. We have actually a whole day of panels. If you want to just hang out in this room all day long, you'll be entertained and educated about all things plant-based. So thanks to New Hope for giving us that opportunity. And it's a really exciting time, of course, for the plant-based foods industry. So I thought I would start by just kind of, let's see. So, PBFA launched last Expo West, and these are our 5 founding board members: Dare Foods, Follow Your Heart, Miracle's Kitchen, Turkey, and Up Naturals. And in just a year or two, we have 80 member companies, and these are various types of food companies that span packaged foods, ingredient suppliers, restaurant chains, meal delivery services, and distributors. And so there's just been this really wonderful response to the launch of this brand new organization, and it's really exciting to see that. So next slide, please. So our mission is pretty straightforward: to ensure a fair and competitive marketplace for businesses selling plant-based foods. So meaning making sure that these companies get a fair shake, whether it's in the retail environment or food service, wherever they want to sell their goods. And then especially to promote policies and practices to improve conditions. So we can talk a little bit later about some of the politics at play in the industry, but we certainly know that historically the meat and dairy industries have gotten a lot of favors in Washington, and so now we have a collective voice for our industry to be a counterweight to that. And then, of course, to educate about all the myriad benefits of plant-based foods. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of some of the consumer trends, which are all really impressive. This was a study actually conducted by the California Walnut Board, so take that for what you will. But they found that 83% of Americans are open to making meatless dishes, especially if they have a similar taste or texture to meat-centric dishes, which is an important caveat, because as we know, people really do like the taste of meat. And so the more that we can help the consumer feel like they're not being deprived by switching over to more plant-based options, the more likely they're going to do that. Next slide, please. And some other stats that are showing the percentage of consumers that are actually purchasing products. So according to Intel data from 2013, about over 1/3 of consumers say they are buying plant-based meats or meat alternatives, and 26% say that they have reduced their meat consumption over the past 12 months. And that's a pretty big part of the population when you think about, out of over 300 million people in the US. And then more recent data actually just came out from this group that's looking at this particular subset of the population, which is known as LOHAS, or Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability. And these are people who tend to kind of be the leaders, if you will, of natural and organic consumption. And so they found that 74% of those types of consumers buy packaged plant-based foods, which is, a pretty huge proportion. And even higher, 81% are buying plant-based, specifically protein foods, so meat alternatives. And so that's a pretty significant finding. Next slide, please. So then to round up some surveys that, the word vegan is now being used in much more mainstream publications and in results of these types of surveys. So this headline is talking about vegan going mainstream. And citing a survey from that Nutrition Business Journal, that said 36% of consumers prefer plant-based milks. And that again, really, really huge. And then thinking about the millennial population, which everyone loves to highlight, and we're finding that that group, 60% are consuming plant-based meats. And we have other stats to show that on college campuses, there's more and more young people demanding that their dining halls provide plant-based options, and it's really a big trend there. Next slide, please. So now I want to talk about what we did recently with Nielsen. And this is really exciting because it's the first of its kind data from Nielsen, which, as you know, is a leading company that gathers retail point of purchase data from around the country. And so what we did, and this was in conjunction with our friends at the Good Food Institute, was we looked at every single category as we, our two organizations, decided to define what we mean by plant-based. So obviously plant-based can mean everything from quinoa to broccoli to beans to turkey. We at the association level welcome all purveyors of plant-based. We happen to have emphasized the meat, egg, and dairy replacement foods, recognizing that those are the foods that consumers need the most help with, making that transition, and that will have the biggest impact on reducing the environmental, health, and animal welfare issues caused by factory farming. So that's what we did. We identified all of the food categories that replace those categories, and the results were across all outlet plus Whole Foods. And so, Nielsen just started getting Whole Foods data recently, so that was great for us. And the time frame was for the past year from that date, August 12th. Next slide. So the results. We found that the sales of top $3 billion, but more important is the growth. So the growth of all of these categories combined, we found was at 8.1%. And just to pause there for a minute, because the stat that I didn't put on the slide, was to compare that to grocery sales in general, we're actually down. And this is kind of staggering. Like, we know that grocery chains are kind of suffering. The sales of food across the same channels are down 0.2%. So the fact that plant-based is increasing at 8%, while generally food is down, is a very big deal. Okay, so the top growth categories are refrigerated meats, again the plant-based alternatives, growing at 23%, much higher than the frozen meat category. Dairy alternatives, excluding milk, talk about that in a minute, at 20%. And then meals, so we looked at meals, again, that contain meat and dairy replacements, growing at 18%. Next slide, please. So let's talk about dairy. So we looked at all kinds of dairy alternatives, and just to break it down for you to see where some of the biggest growth is happening, yogurt is just exploding. I mean, you can see it on the show floor. There's so much innovation happening in the yogurt alternative category, and that's growing at 56%. And keep in mind that it's the categories that are sort of relatively new that are going to be growing more versus a more mature category. But ice cream is just always a fun category. It's growing at 26%. There's a lot of great ice creams out there on the show floor. And then the cheese category is growing at 19%. So milks are interesting because they're a more mature category, right? They've been on the market for a while. And that category makes up half of the entire universe of plant-based foods. Still growing at a bit over 3%. But what's most interesting about that result is that when we compare it to cow's milk sales, that category is actually down 5%. So that means there's a 8 percentage point difference between the sales of plant-based milk and cow's milk. So that's pretty huge. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for the industry? Obviously, it means our industry is growing, and other evidence that we have of this is that big food companies are taking notice of the success of this industry. So I just put up here a few pretty recent news headlines, certainly all within the last year or so, of companies that happen to be PBFA members. There are others out there, but these particular companies have all been either purchased or been invested in by a big food company. And so what does that tell us? That tells us that big food companies want in on this explosive category. And we can discuss, is that a good thing? I think it is mostly a good thing because it means more opportunity for growth within plant-based. So when a company like Nestle says, we want to take Sweet Earth and blow it up, then obviously that's better for everybody. So it's really exciting to see that kind of thing happen. Next slide, please. So I want to talk just quickly about the variety of foods because we want to talk about innovation. So this will be a kind of a segue to Barbara. But I want to just give you some breadth of the types of foods that our members represent. And I just want to also give you a heads up that we have a handy dandy directory that we worked very hard on our website, which actually allows you to drill down to each of these subcategories. So meat alternatives, dairy alternatives, and then other foods. And then you can drop down each of those menu items and you can actually see which of our members make yogurts and ice creams and milks, and it's pretty cool, I think. So you can do that at our website. And then the next slide, just to give you like a few examples. So this is just in the plant-based burger category. So if you were to, select on burgers, there's probably more of our members that make burgers, but the point of this slide is actually just to tell you the range of types of burgers that are on the market. So you have some companies like Tofurky with this DIY brand they just came out with, which has more kind of a raw meat texture to it, so you can make your own burgers with it. Hungry Planet, another member that's going for that kind of hamburger taste and texture, versus some other companies like Hillary's Sunshine that are using more whole food ingredients, going for that just kind of veggie burger type of experience. And then we have this interesting company called Micah Foods where they're using vegetables as the main ingredient. So their colors are really vibrant. It's just a whole different type of approach. And so that's just the carrot variety. So it's just interesting to see that kind of range that's on the market. Next slide, please. And then these are our members that make plant-based milks. And there's probably a few that I've left off, but I wanted to just give you, again, this idea of the range of types of products that are out there. And you have everything from, the traditional soy milk, of course, almond milk, but now there's coconut milk. The company Malk makes a lot of interesting milks, including my favorite, which is pecan milk. And then flax milk. Who knew you could make milk from flaxseed? We're going to talk more about that in the next session. And then there's a company making a milk out of vegetables, so Vegimo. And then my favorite that I haven't tried yet, at least in concept, is banana milk. And so, it seems like there's just no end to the types of milk that can be put out there. And if you go on the show floor, you'll be amazed at all the different varieties out there. And we're going to talk with the company Elmhurst in the next session, and I definitely recommend you check them out. So lots of variety there. Next slide, please. And then just to sum it up with what's happening globally, of course, this isn't just a trend that's happening in the US. So this is a stat from Market Insights that found that food and drink launches with the vegetarian claim were up 60%, and this is a global stat. So that's really impressive. And then next slide. And then the same survey looked at the types of protein ingredients that are being used in meat substitutes. And I thought it was just interesting that, there's a lot of excitement and a lot of look towards new ingredients, but actually the ingredients that have kind of been around a while are still tried and true. So wheat and soy being the most common ones. And I think that might be it. Next slide. Okay, I want to end on the world domination slide. So these are some stats that I pulled together from groups that are making predictions about what we're going to see not even that far in the future. So one predicts that by 2020, dairy alternatives will be worth $19 billion. I mean, that's a lot of money. And this is globally. And then also by 2020, the meat market to reach $5 billion. And then this one pretty impressive by 2054, a little bit further out, that plant-based protein could represent 1/3 of all protein. I mean, globally, that's staggering to think that could happen. And I certainly hope that we're on the path to do that. So with that, I think that we'll wrap things up, and I'll just encourage folks to check out our website. That's our social media handle. We have a couple of staffers here and some information in the back. So thank you, Jenna, for the opportunity. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And let's just wait for questions until the end so we can have enough time. But slide, please. Great. So it's really inspiring to hear all of those really strong sales figures in the vegan category. What was once kind of a fringe specialty diet, it's growing so much, and it really shows that it has the strength to make the world a better place in total. So now I would be thrilled to have a little conversation with Barbara. So Barbara is the VP of Innovation Manager at Matson. And so can you kind of just describe what Matson does and what their mission statement is?
So Matson is the leading independent developer of new products for the food and beverage industry. And we're celebrating our 40th year in business next month. So we're very excited about that. And I've been with the company for 20 years. And my focus has been mainly health and wellness for the last 18 years. And we've worked deeply in the plant-based space for a long time, starting with Boca Burger almost 20 years ago. We worked with Boca all the way through their sale to Kraft and beyond. But having said that, we also are located in San Francisco, so we're kind of the epicenter of food and technology, and that seems to be the direction that plant-based foods are going. They're utilizing technology to deliver better tasting alternatives to meat and dairy. We've had the opportunity to work with some of the cutting edge products like Beyond Burger. We've worked with Good Karma, with Flax Milk. We've worked with Ripple. We designed that product for them. And we do all sorts of protein shakes and cultured proteins. I will say that it's kind of it reminds me of soy, when soy was kind of, new kid on the block, and everybody was working to make soy products taste better, to make them more acceptable to the consumer. And I was explaining to someone the other day, we are looking at developing a number of protein shakes, and all proteins are not created equal. And we had 15 different plant-based proteins, and each one was a different color and a different texture. And so, sourcing is an issue right now. The supply chain, the really good proteins are hard to get, and the supply is limited, but it's getting better. And it's kind of wide open as far as development, because a lot of these products that are being developed now have not been developed before, and the protein systems have never, existed. So the suppliers don't know what ingredients go together to make the product work. And so we've been working deeply in this space for, I would say, at least the last 5 years with all these different proteins. And it takes a bit of discovery and diligence to make it work.
So can you describe that process of making a new product, either from a client coming to you and requesting a certain type of plant-based product, or you kind of formulating one for a client? How long does that take? What's involved in that?
So we work with the largest food companies in the world, all the way down to smaller new startups. So it keeps it interesting. Sometimes the client comes to us and they want a plant-based product, but they don't know exactly what they want. So that starts with innovation, looking at market trends and looking at existing technology and what we believe is feasible and works for that particular client. The other is the client will come to us and say, we want a plant-based yogurt. So we then would identify what's the best way forward to develop that yogurt. And we would start sourcing proteins and other ingredients and start the development process. We also specialize in commercialization. So every time we develop a product in the lab, we have the end game in mind. So we're always thinking about who's going to produce it, how's it going to get produced, because you can make anything in a lab, and I don't want to take anything away from our food technologists, but you can't always scale. and scale is the hardest thing to do. So we have a couple of pilot plants at Matson, so we develop prototypes in the lab. That means that we source industrial ingredients, but we replicate a commercial process as best we can. And then we move to our pilot plant. And then we work in collaboration with the contract manufacturer that we have generally sourced for a client. And that whole process from beginning to end, from the time a client walks in the door, can be as little as 6 months, or it can be as long as a year. And I will say that with plant-based, to give you a perspective, if you think about some of the high-protein shakes, so we've worked for Premier Protein for many years. They're the leading protein shake, dairy protein shake on the market. It took 2 years to develop that product, just because no one had ever done a 30-gram protein shake before. So we're kind of facing the same thing with plant-based shakes, is even if they're 15 or 20 grams, no one's ever really done this before. So it can take longer depending upon what we're trying to achieve.
I'd love to go back to that picture that you mentioned of the different types of proteins, and every single one was a different color and a different viscosity and just so different to even work with. So I guess what are the challenges of using a specific type of plant-based proteins when developing new products?
So the challenges are, some are more fibrous. I mean, pea is sort of the celebrity protein, right? Everybody wants pea, but all peas are not created equal. They don't have the same texture. They're not processed in the same way. They don't have the same flavor. Some are more pea forward, I guess, in flavor.
Why is pea so popular now?
Because it's easier to formulate with, and it has a great amino acid profile. It's not a complete protein, so you do need to blend it, but it's much easier to formulate with than some of the other proteins. So rice protein, which has been around for a long time, it's a more fibrous protein, so it tends to give you more of a grainy texture. And so finding, different protein flours that work together, that give you a complete protein, that's always, kind of the challenge. And then the color, a lot of these pea proteins are brown. Many are kind of green looking. So if you want something that's lighter in color, smooth and creamy in texture. I mean, who doesn't want creamy? You want your ice cream to be creamy. You want your milk to be creamy. I was with a young woman yesterday from London, and she said, I'm a vegan, and I have 4 plant-based milks in my refrigerator at any given time. I use one for my coffee, I use one for my oatmeal, I use one for this, and I said, well, what if you had just one milk that you could use for everything? She said that would be more ideal, right? So there's no one product out there now, I think, that does that, but we're moving towards that. And I walked the show yesterday, and I can tell you that the quality of the plant-based products is far superior than it was even a couple of years ago. And I think that's because we've been on this trajectory of a learning curve and learning how to use these proteins. The supply chain has been, it's increasingly improving. We have more, as we say, tools in our toolbox. And, formulators are getting more skilled.
What are the emerging ingredients that innovators like you and your company are kind of working with right now? I guess my question is, what's the next big ingredient in the plant-based space?
Pea protein?
That's coming out? Yeah.
So yesterday.
I guess that's a difficult question to answer. There's a lot of good proteins out there. Europe has been deeply immersed in lupin for years. We haven't done much. That might be something on the horizon. I think that what we're going to see in the near future is just an improved supply chain. And I think we're going to look for, different combinations of, blends of proteins.
Okay. And will that improve supply chain? Will that eventually lower the price of some of these plant-based products, which, up until now have kind of had a higher entry to get into because of their cost?
I think that certainly as more supply becomes available, they become less expensive. I do think, eating well costs money. And, we're not only formulating plant-based products, but we're formulating clean label, non-GMO. Basically everybody is looking for, the cleanest, purest product they can have. So to some extent, being able to buy these ingredients or use them in a system is challenging because they do cost.
And then my final question for you, are there any certain categories that you're seeing that kind of have a dead space in terms of plant-based options that are really high quality? What different categories in the grocery store still need a lot of work?
So it's interesting, and I've said this many times, that I've been in the food industry for 40 years myself, and this is the most exciting time I've ever seen in the food industry, just because there's so much opportunity. We work across every category, every market, every channel. Every category is ripe for disruption. And I think there's so much opportunity out there to really develop, quality products. And I was explaining earlier that I decided I wanted to try this lifestyle of vegan before 6. And I thought, because of health issues, but also because I wanted to see how difficult or easy it was. And what I'm discovering is, because of the sheer amount of, better quality plant-based alternatives, it's actually much easier than I thought it would be. And I have this gentleman to thank for some of that.
Well, that's a good note to actually transition it to you, Min. And again, Min is the founder of Hodo Soy, an amazing tofu company.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be on the stage with you guys. Tofu, it's been around a couple of thousand years in Asia, a lot less here, roughly a little over 40 years. What I try to do more than a decade ago, I now call disrupt, but at the time it was just trying to make a better tasting tofu. May I have the next slide, please? So Hodo's been around since 03, 04. I started the farmer's market. And so I want to walk us through sort of how I think and the trends that we serve over time. We're very lucky because tofu as a category or as a product somehow transcends all these trends that's been happening over the last decade or so. But when we first started out, we were following the trend of eating local, eating organic, farmers markets, organic, non-GMO. And, in the Bay Area, we have a lot of disruptive, not so much new category, but new foods, whether it's olive oil or chocolate, better quality premium products. So that was the trend we were following. I chose tofu because I loved it, and I couldn't find the quality that I wanted to eat here. So typical story, right? And then as we grew from the farmers markets and beyond, we met all these trends, whether it's gluten-free, paleo, veganism, vegetarianism, health-conscious consumptions. So that really helped us grow over the sort of the middle age years. And then the last 5 years or so, what we've seen is tremendous growth. I think almost to the what I would call a tipping point is coming when it comes to plant-based and tofu. But for tofu in particular, it's sort of like a full cycle. Now, we started with tofu as sort of the original, environmental food in the 70s, and now it sort of comes full cycle, tofu 2.0, better tofu, however you want to see it. And we're very lucky that we're able to play in that space and reintroduce it from the perspective of innovation, education, and sort of work with the trend of the interest in plant-based and flexitarianism. Next slide, please. This is what we know from having done this. Some of it is data-based, and you both have pointed that out. But basically, what we see is consumers are still looking for more plant-based food. That trend is growing. I myself am a representative of that. I eat more I'm an omnivore, but I eat a lot more plant-based food now because of sheer variety and better quality, as you point out. As we make our tofu products, especially in soy, we need to educate people about the difference between tofu as a whole bean soy food versus soy protein isolates, for example. We've done a good job with that. Transparency is still paramount. Consumers still want ingredient pure products, as you point out, minimally processed, clean label, and that's not going to change. It's costly, but it's you have some people who will demand that. Some folks will basically make the swap between pricing and that. But generally, that's the trade-off. And then finally, everything we put out, we aim to have amazing taste, because we think, especially in tofu, and given the history of tofu in the US, we need to make it flavorful. We need the texture to be really delicious and easy, chewy. We want our tofu to be a gateway for people who are moving into vegetarianism or veganism, but also for anyone who grew up eating tofu in an unsatisfying way to say, wow, this is different, this is new, now I will like tofu. So, next slide, please. So taste continues to make high quality, delicious products. So everything we put out there needs to meet these criteria. Innovation, we're fortunate in that we're small enough as a company that we can go through these innovation loops. We have the farmers markets, we have local markets, that we can actually get a product out there very quickly and taste it and test it and decide whether we want to mass produce it for larger retail markets or not. And then expertise. Over the last decade, what we've done is through education, through the mastery of the artisan approach to making tofu versus the aseptic large-scale approach, and also understanding the science of tofu. We used to have a t-shirt that said, "Who's your tofu master?" It's supposed to be an ironic statement because we look at it very much from a scientific standpoint as well. But tofu's been around for a couple of thousand years, so we have a lot of recipes to go back. What we're trying to do is, from an innovation standpoint, and you see that in the next couple of years from Hodo, is how to really take you as a consumer, not so much towards more Asian recipe, even though that's really hot right now, but more global recipes when it comes to tofu-based product. Next slide, please. These are the folks we serve. So we serve vegans and transitional plant-based consumers. We don't see the world in such a binary way, and sometimes in the US that seems to be the case, but tofu is generally consumed with meat in Asia. So we see it as a great transition into veganism, a vegetarian or more plant-based food. We serve both the health conscious and the traditional healthy eaters. And here, we recognize that people eat plant-based food for health reasons, and tofu is one of the most traditional but also versatile plant-based food. And it's ingredient pure, it's minimally processed, it's whole soybeans. So what's lacking in the beginning was the fact that it didn't taste great. So now that we have the taste, so the health conscious folks will eat it for health reason, and the healthy eaters will eat it for taste reason first. So that's how I make the distinctions. And then finally, tofu eaters, those who eat tofu are moving into higher quality organic tofu that we make and yuba and such. But we also find a new group of people who are eating tofu for the first time because of taste and flavors and texture as well. And so we want to play in both of those spaces. Next slide. So these are some of the folks we work with. I point these out because half of our business is in the food service side. And it's important for us to rely on this group not so much as propagator of tofu, but also as innovators. So they come up with the recipes when we give them the firm tofu. So we leverage these chefs very much. We have tofu disrupt events, and we currently serve about 2,500 restaurants. And so it's a big part of not just our sales, but our innovation as well. Next slide. Oh, so I'm missing one last slide, which is related to our retail market. We've grown from about 200 locations to about 1,500 over the last 2 years. And we found the velocity of sales in conventional grocers to be matching that of natural, which is super surprising for us when it comes to our category. So lots of hope, not quite world domination, but we're getting there. Thanks.
So Min, you mentioned that some of these big food providers and food service providers are propagators and innovators, but I would add to that educators as well.
Right.
Because they touch so many people. So I guess, are you working on any new partnerships that you can share with anyone? At least from the
always.
food service side? Okay.
So I love to share, except some of our clients are not ready for me to share. But we are, over time, have become sort of the tofu expert. So anyone who works specifically in tofu and innovation and texture and flavors have now come to us. And we're working with them. So we have some exciting food service customers that I hope to launch with in the next 12 months. And then also on the retail side, our brand is really, we see a lot of opportunity with our brand. And so I was telling Barbara here that in the next 12 to 18 months, you're going to see a different line of products coming out as well.
Great.
So.
Well, before we get to Q&A, I'm just going to go down kind of some of the products that I've seen so far on the show floor that are plant-based, extremely innovative, and that you can check out after this presentation. So again, my name is Jenna. I'm the senior food editor for New Hope. I spend a lot of my time seeking out these new trends at the shows, but also throughout the entire year. So I'm always covering products. And I like to think of myself always having my binoculars on anytime that I'm at the show floor. So slide. So before I start, I just wanted to share this quote from Bruce Friedrich. He's the executive director of the Good Food Institute that Michele's organization works with. I have no doubt that in 50 years, people are going to look back on eating conventionally raised animals as absurd, just like the invention of the plane and the car made traveling by horse and buggy unthinkable. These plant-based and cultured innovations are going to make raising animals to eat them a thing of the past. So this quote really demonstrates that this is the future, and companies are definitely getting on board. Slide, please. So why do plant-based products matter? Well, to go vegan, a lot of people do it for health reasons because they were recommended to by a doctor. They do it for environmental reasons, or they do it for animal welfare reasons, for the ethical reasons. But products matter because if you don't want to go plant-based through any of these three reasons on the left side of the screen, they actually tap into taste and convenience and thrill of discovery and education. So all of these exciting reasons to go plant-based. And that's from a product standpoint. It's not necessarily because of the philosophy of it. Did anyone see our keynote speaker, Jonathan, speak today? This morning, he wrote a book called Eating Animals, where he kind of discusses that whole philosophy of should you actually eat animals versus can you eat it. But products kind of add this fun dimension to it. Slide, please. So a lot of coverage has been of these kind of food tech plant proteins. And so these are amazing products that kind of are meat and dairy analogs. So they're kind of designed to be exactly like meat and dairy. And they really tap into that consumer that I always reference my Uncle Arnie, who is a deer hunter in Vermont, and he would never even think of touching any of these these more traditional plant proteins. And so these are, the burger that bleeds. At the top you have Beyond Meat. On the bottom here, that's shrimp from New Wave Foods, and that's kind of an alternative to ocean-based shrimp and all the problems associated with that. Up at the left, it's cultured meat. That's from Memphis Meats, and so that's real meat made in a lab, but just without the cow. And at the bottom is Impossible Foods, which has a really unique ingredient based off of soy that actually appears to be blood. So when you bite into it, you get that kind of savory taste. So these products are extremely important for the future, but I'm more excited about these kind of old school plant proteins, like tofu, like seitan. Kelly Sweet, the CEO of Sweet Earth Natural Foods, recently said, "Why has seitan survived so long? It's because it's juicy, it's tender, it's artisan made, it delivers lean protein, it's been used around the world. Seitan has been rediscovered for modern times, and the best part is that it's available right now." Her company is making these delicious seitan-based products by taking them and looking at them from a culinary perspective rather than, here, this is just like a meat protein and it's good for you, right? So slide. And you don't have to take my word for it. Of course, these huge companies like Pinnacle, like Maple Leaf, Danone, Otsuka, and Nestle, they're paying attention to this as well, like Michele mentioned. Slide. Okay, so these are some of the products I found at the show, and I really recommend that you should look out. Of course, we have the Tofurkey DIY burger. So this is kind of like a pound of ground. You can use it just like any ground meat that you find in the grocery store, and it really fuels that DIY and creativity in the kitchen that so many consumers are looking for. No Evil Foods, up at the top, is a seitan-based product. They take a really unique approach and kind of make it so delicious. This one is called Comrade Cluck, and I just love the packaging and that too. It would really stand out on the shelf. At the bottom, we have Alpha Foods. This is a new company launching at the show. They make a plant-based burrito, and their consumer is really those people who know that they should reduce their meat consumption, but don't really want to sacrifice taste. And so I can just see this right next to like a gas station burrito, and the choice is kind of simple, and they both taste so delicious. And at the bottom, this is one of my favorite companies at the show. It's called Good Catch. They were actually only at the Harvest Festival, I believe. I don't think they're on the show floor, but I'm not positive. But out of a blend of 5 beans, they're making a tuna substitute, and it actually flakes like real tuna, and it tastes like real tuna. So they made it kind of with these whole ingredients, but it tastes really delicious and has 17 grams of protein. Slide. And of course, non-dairy milks. I'm sure you've seen a lot if you've walked the show at all. There's Oatly. It's a milk made from oats. It's extremely clean label. It's only oats, water, and a vitamin blend. Down at the bottom, there's Organic Gemini. This is a tiger nut milk beverage. So if you don't know what tiger nuts are, they're actually not a nut. They're a starchy tuber that's about the size of your fingernail. Then we have Milkademia, kind of experimenting with these different milks. That's macadamia. And up at the top, these are Elmhurst milked peanuts. And they're a unique company because they used to be a dairy since 1925. And only recently, they kind of transitioned into that plant-based space. Slide, please. And of course, non-dairy cheese and yogurt, they're just getting better and better. You have some from Forager, Mayoko's Kitchen. I recently took a group of influencers, including Jackie down here from my vegan journal, to Mayoko's before the show floor opened, and they were also excited to meet Mayoko. Miyoko, thank you. I'm horrible with pronunciation. Kite Hill is rocking it with their Greek-style yogurts, and this is a new company called Mozzarella. It's made from a sprouted brown rice. So it kind of, you can cut it like fresh mozzarella. And slide. And finally, snacks. These are the perfect way to bridge for people to bridge into a plant-based lifestyle. They're really about taste and functionality and fun rather than using cheese and butter and everything. So these Trill bars is from a small company based out of Boulder, Colorado. They're so delicious. They're entirely vegan. They might have honey in them. And then Lily Puffs is a brand that's made with water lily seeds that are puffed. I've never seen that ingredient at the show before. And they use a nutritional yeast blend to kind of get that cheesy flavor. At the bottom, we have Fronana, which is made just from bananas that are frozen and mixed with different add-ins like chocolate and other fruits. And at the bottom, this is such a simple product, but it's popcorn popped with coconut oil that's flavored like butter. So it doesn't have any dairy in it, but it still gets that buttery taste. And slide, thanks. And one more slide. Okay, so now I would love to open this up to the audience for questions. I'm sure you have a lot. Yeah, let's start with you.
Slides, can you get them for you guys?
Yes, all the slides will be available, if that's okay with you guys. Okay, yes.
Thanks for the presentations. They were enormously helpful. What are your views about the clean meat industry and how that will progress?
So the question, I'll be repeating the questions. It's what are your views about the clean meat industry?
I have to start?
Oh,
Yeah,
would anyone of you like to comment?
What meat industry?
The clean
you should
meat?
explain.
Clean meat.
So actually growing cells in the lab. So
Oh, okay, so,
Oh, it's sort of
right,
the
so more of a
Memphis meat
culture.
type.
Yeah.
I don't know yet. I'm waiting to see. I think it's exciting, but I'm not a scientist, so I think the time frame is going to be long, I imagine, and the cost. So I'm super curious. I haven't tried Memphis meat, but yeah.
I mean, I do think that the, Beyond Burger and the Impossible Burger have, elevated the kind of the meat alternative experience. And, I think that consumers, the idea of something grown in a petri dish is maybe not as appealing as something that was not. But I think if the experience delivers, I think consumers will get over it.
So I'll just chime in, remembering what Jonathan Safran Foer said this morning, which is that there's no silver bullet and there's no one answer to, solving this horrendous problem called factory farming. And so I feel like we need all solutions on the table, and it's great that people are going, pursuing their passion. Minna's obviously really passionate about tofu, and there are other people who are passionate about this new technology. I look at issues actually from a political and regulatory, and I'm a lawyer, and I think there are a lot of challenges ahead, not just scientific, for the cultured clean meat arena, and that's what worries me. And I'm a little concerned about so much, there's a lot of hype in general, actually, around new things. And so, I'm putting my personal effort into helping the companies that are currently in the marketplace right now, that are using ingredients that consumers understand, that are having challenges in just staying on shelf. And those are the solutions that we can implement right now to help people reduce their meat consumption, and not 10 years from now.
I would say that when you look at it from a transparency point of view, I mean, factory farms, I think that you get arrested if you try to bring a camera in there and kind of film what they're doing. But from my understanding, the cultured meat type industry would maybe be in almost like a brewery, like you would be brewing it in these big tanks. And so if that industry can actually have that level of transparency where they invite consumers in, see how their meat is being made, I mean, that's radically different from our current system that we have. So.
Is that considered genetically modified?
Genetically modified? I'm not sure. I don't know the details of how they do it.
I was going to say when I needed that question to be repeated, because when you said clean meat, I mean, literally 3 things popped into my head. There's the Memphis meat, there's like the clean grazing cows, and then there's the Impossible Burger plant-based. So it's not quite defined yet. Yeah.
Yep.
So, we were talking earlier about why pea protein's been used a lot and what's the cheapest, right? So there's other alternatives, flax, pumpkin, watermelon seeds. There's a lot of stuff coming on the market. They're north of $15 a kilo. Are you guys seeing possibly a trend or a way to drive some of those other ones down in price, or we could actually start having alternatives to pea and rice?
I think, again, it comes back to supply. So we're using all of those proteins as blends. They tend to be as the peas the lead, and these tend to be a smaller portion of the formula. But as more plant-based products are developed and these ingredients are used more, I think the price will come down as the supply increases.
I think soy belongs in the legume family. And I think as we educate people more about protein, the legume family is one of the sources of the highest protein plant-based foods out there. So I think the category that's the cheapest right now remains soy milk. But as we develop into the dairy side, fat is a big component of taste. So nut fat is really delicious. So I think to Barbara's point, until there's scale, the price is not going to go down, and the supply chain and the logistics of growing and supplying, it's going to remain a challenge. And we're fortunate because soy is readily available, and it's commodity price. So
it's also neutral in flavor,
right.
And it's very easy to formulate with, and it has a great amino acid profile. So, it would be, there is high quality high quality soy available, non-GMO. It would be great to see more of it used.
Yeah.
Time will tell.
I can just speak for a few of our members who I know have challenges sourcing good ingredients, and particularly domestically. I mean, it's so heartbreaking to me, and thinking about this issue from a political perspective, it's really important that when we go, and I will be going on Monday to meet with our members of Congress to talk about our industry's challenges, to be able to say, we obviously are a source of business for America's farmers, and that agriculture isn't just meat and dairy. It actually starts with plants. All agriculture starts with plants. And but when I hear from members that they can't get organic soy except for 1 or 2 places, and obviously that makes it expensive, or they can't get organic almonds. I'm in California, the almond state, but there isn't a ready supply of organic almonds for companies who choose to make organic almond milk, and so they're importing almonds from Spain. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. So obviously there's a lot of work to do to make for a better supply chain, and a lot of that actually is shifting our agricultural policies in the right direction.
Michele, would you say that lawmakers are kind of getting it? Do they, or are they still kind of stuck in their old ways of kind of supporting this type of agriculture that we're kind of all trying to change?
Well, obviously it's a mixed bag. So we do certainly still have some old timers in Congress that are very much tied to, the biggest players in agribusiness, which are the pesticide industry, the meat and dairy industries, the status quo that put us in the mess that we're currently in. And it's very hard to undo that. And so we're actually coming up on the next Farm Bill in 2018. And I have to tell you, there isn't a lot of hope for big changes. Obviously, we don't exactly have a friendly administration or Congress ready and willing to make big changes with that monster legislation that does impact a lot of our food policy. Michael Pollan says we should call it the food bill, not the farm bill, and that might get more people engaged in it. But but on the positive side, there is a generational shift happening in Congress, and I am most hopeful about the younger members, and we do occasionally meet with the younger members that are seeing the light themselves, maybe vegetarian. Of course, we have Senator Cory Booker, who's everyone's favorite vegan senator, and he does a lot to help bring attention to these issues, and of course, just the advent of PBFA and what we're doing. We're going to hold a luncheon on Capitol Hill in November, where we're going to highlight our members' foods there. So hopefully, and that's going to be hosted by something called the Congressional Vegetarian Caucus, which is made up of staffers, of members of Congress who are trying to, promote plant-based diets. And so, there's definitely a shift happening, and we're going to keep pushing to make that continue.
Great. We have another question? Yep.
Related to that, I'm curious, like in addition to policy, what do you see as the role of big food in solving some of these challenges around supply or cost or where does that play a role?
Well, like I said, we're trying to make the case for plant-based foods as an important part of American agriculture, and to emphasize the need to, just like the organic industry has been trying to shift policies away from, it's really about economic incentives. And so the reason why, so much of farming is in corn and soy is because there are economic incentives to grow those ingredients, of course not for human consumption, unfortunately mostly for animal consumption. And that's the engine that keeps factory farming going, is the cheap inputs of animal feed. And there's more to it than that. There's consolidation of the meat industry. There's just the concentrated power that keeps the status quo. But the agricultural policy isn't going to change until we change the economic incentives. And one idea I've had is to talk to our members of Congress about how to incentivize farmers to switch over from these, very harmful, intensive practices to more sustainable practices, in part to support these plant-based food companies that we're talking about here that need better ingredients. And, there are some examples already of, for example, dairy farms. We know the dairy industry is on the decline, at least in terms of milk consumption especially. And so some dairy farmers are already converting their land over to almond groves in California, for example. We're going to talk later, mention Elmhurst Dairy, my poster child for that exciting transition that can happen when, no longer is milk as a productive economic product as it once was, but, what plant-based is on the rise. So I think the more we can encourage that shift, which is obviously being driven by consumer interest, and creating that demand to get the agricultural players in this country to help, provide more inputs that the industry needs, then obviously it's win-win.
I also think that the consumer has gotten the attention of big food in wanting clean labels and clean, more pure, wholesome, simple food. And we work with lots of large corporations. They've all got plant-based on their radar. They're definitely thinking, we're constantly reformulating, negative ingredients or controversial ingredients out of foods. And organic is growing as well. So I think that, through consumer desire, demand, lifestyle changes, and also as, the landscape in Washington changes, it will change.
Yep, another question? Yeah.
So what was your inspiration or your background to launch your company there? Is your soy ferment?
I just couldn't find good tofu, so that's the main reason. Because I grew up in Vietnam, and I ate a lot of delicious varieties of tofu, but here in the U.S., more than 10 years ago, I just couldn't find it. So it's a really dumb way to start a business in some ways, but I'm lucky in that all the trends really support the interest of higher quality, organic, plant-based foods. So we're a product of luck as much as innovation and education. So that's pretty much the short answer to your question. Yeah. Oh, tofu, it's actually just bean and water. Pretty much, you can't ferment tofu because if you do, it becomes a cheese, just like all the Miyoko cheeses are fermented or cultured nut milk. I can try, but it's going to contaminate a whole plant, so I'm not trying that yet. So I'll leave that to Miyoko.
Yep, question here.
Hi. It seems that today food has become uniquely personal. So if you're a young plant-based entrepreneur, how should you contemplate, maybe converting is the wrong word, but getting the Vermont deer hunter onto the boat without sounding alienating or pretentious? When I gave the news to my mom a few months ago that I was going vegan, she freaked out. So she was born in '63, so I guess like we don't have to worry about boomers. How are you guys viewing speaking to that sort of audience where I think a lot of people, especially boomer and probably some Gen X people, are turned off by it and feel that it's a little patronizing?
Min, do you want to take this question? Because I don't know if you saw Chipotle up there, but his product is in all the every Chipotle store, every single Chipotle store across the country.
Well, I think you just did it by making the announcement in public. It's a great question. I don't know whether, if I can answer that question, I think we cracked the nut. But I think we were just talking about it, that to me, you have the younger folks, a higher percentage of young folks eating plant-based food. And believe it or not, as we get older, the boomers actually eating plant-based food more as well. So in between, just like in Middle America, you have people who are eating less plant-based food. And to get the in-between people to eat more, you need the young people and the old people to cook more for them, of course. But also you need to reduce price. You need to have sort of gateway transitional type food. There's a reason why there's 10 burgers out there of different varieties. So, and my point about how tofu can go really well with meat, I think you have to ease into it and not make it one or the other. So, and as long as you stay healthy, I'm sure your mom's gonna be happy.
I think that it's also really focused on taste too, to highlight that, I mean, this is a tasty product. This is not a sacrifice. I know, some products that you may have tried when you were younger, they weren't really up to par. I mean, you couldn't find a good tasting tofu in the United States. And so I think getting people to try it is a really big component of that. And, for brands, you can do that through sampling, especially at retail stores. If I'm not mistaken, if you tried the Sofrito tofu when it first launched, did you get a free burrito? Were they doing that?
Yeah, they still do
Yes.
it. It's like buy one, get one sometimes. I actually think this is going to go on record, right? My favorite burrito at Chipotle is actually a combination of chicken and sofritas. And I've been trying to get them to do that for a couple of years. And I'm like, just promote that, for example, because I love it. It's very subjective. But, so.
Yeah, there's a project called the Blended Burger Project, and they're replacing half of the meat in burgers with a blend of mushrooms and all of these savory vegetables. And the whole idea is to get a burger that still has meat in it, but is vastly more nutritious because of all the vegetables in it. And so it's really highlighting, like, yes, it has less meat. You're not going to die because it has less meat. So again, it's about taste.
Yeah, and we work with Google, and they have a concept called Burger, B-U-R-G-R. And the idea is to reduce the amount of meat in their burgers, and they have gone from like 20% to 40%. They're trying to get below 50%. So we're working with them, trying to help them move that needle.
So cool. Any other questions?
Do they charge the same as
They don't charge.
You have to work at Google.
All the food is free.
But yeah, that'd be interesting if they did, if a store or a restaurant, actually did that, would these two products be the same price, or would they, I don't know.
But I think theoretically it'd be less expensive. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think if there are no other questions, I think I'll conclude the presentation. Thank you all again. I think that this will be online in some capacity. Oh, right, and the rest of the day is all plant-based focused. And so, yeah, you can see Michele again talking about legislation and just really get a holistic view of the plant-based world for the rest of the day.